Kate and I heard the word podcast mentioned on any kind of like traditional media, like we flipped out. And usually it was people making fun of it, but like it was still like crazy that they would even make fun of it. Like I can't even believe they would make fun of podcasting. That's nuts. So it's just become now something that everybody's doing. The barrier is so low to do a podcast. It is what it is. Everybody's doing it.
Do you think that's a good thing that the barrier to entry is so low?
It's a good thing and it's a bad thing. It's a good thing if you understand that, hey, the barrier to start a podcast is low, but the barrier to creating an amazing podcast that gets any kind of success or traction is unbelievably high and much more difficult than it used to be because of the saturation in the market. If you are a podcaster, and again, this goes for literally every entrepreneur as well, starting a business, if you can't look in the mirror and say, I am solving this problem better than anybody else, you are going to lose, because your podcast, your business idea, your product, your service, whatever it might be, it must be the number one solution to a real problem in this world. If it's not, you will lose. If it is, you have a chance of winning, because people will beat a path to the doorstep of the number one solution to a real problem they have. They won't listen to the second best podcast interviewing entrepreneurs because it's been done.
Welcome to today's episode of Influence by Design. I'm your host, Samantha Riley, and today I'm welcoming John Lee Dumas to the show. Now, JLD is the founder and host of the award-winning podcast, Entrepreneurs on Fire. He has over 100 million listens and over 3,000 episodes. He's turned Entrepreneurs on Fire into a media empire that generates 1 million listens every month, just every month, and 7 figures of annual revenue, and has done so for 8 years in a row. Now, he is, I believe, the only podcast in this space that still, after all of this time, since 2012, has released a daily episode. So we dive into why he does that, how he does that, why he's chosen to do that. It's a very short interview because he is a very busy person, so we could only manage a short time with him. But the interview is very snappy. There's a whole heap of information in here, and it will inspire you to hopefully go on and do some crazy things for yourself. So without further ado, let's roll the tape. Here's our interview with John Lee Dumas from Entrepreneurs on Fire. Welcome to the show, John Lee Dumas. It is fabulous to have you here. Love it. I would like to, look at all the balloons. I listened to Entrepreneurs on Fire as the very first podcast I'd ever heard. I'd never heard a podcast before, so I was a very early Fire Nation member. What I would love to know is why did you decide to start a podcast so early? And why did you decide to go with daily episodes? Because that's a huge time sap.
So 2012 was a time when there weren't that many podcasts in the world. It was still kind of a unique thing. The iPhone was just kind of starting to become this device that people were using for things like podcast listening. So that kind of became huge. And I started doing that. Like, I was a listener. I was a consumer. I was reading a ton of books on business. I was listening to a ton of audiobooks. It gets expensive to buy books and to listen to audio and to buy audiobooks. And people said, hey, podcasting's this free platform to listen to great stuff as well. And I remember listening to my first few and being like, man, you can really get a ton of value. It's not so scripted as a lot of these audiobooks are, which are really professional and edited. And the person that's speaking the audiobook is like really, pedantic. and it was good, but I really liked the kind of relaxing, chilled, laid back conversation that could happen, because sometimes that was where the real gold was. It was like in that kind of relaxed conversational time period. So I said, man, I love this. And I just started consuming as much as I could. And I remember very clearly just saying, hey, I'm going to go find that podcast that releases a daily show so that every day as I'm driving to work, I'm hitting the gym, I'm walking my dog, I can listen to a new interview of a successful entrepreneur. That show didn't exist. I said, that's crazy. I will be the change I want to see in the world. And I decided to launch the first, and to this day, still only daily podcast. interviewing the world's most successful entrepreneurs.
How do you manage doing a daily show? Like, as a podcaster, I get it. Why? I did try it for 1 month because I wanted to do it as an experiment and see what happened. I can tell you my episodes, my downloads, and my listens went through the roof, but I
Oh,
just
yeah.
couldn't keep it up. How do you manage to do that and keep it up on a daily, show?
I was interested in becoming successful as a podcaster. And if you want to become successful as a podcaster, there's a few variables that need to come true. Number one, you need to become good at podcasting, at communicating, at having conversations, facilitating, asking questions, interviewing, being the interviewer. I had none of
Mm,
those skills. How was I going to become good at doing that 4 days per month, which is what most people were doing with their podcast, 1 day per week? Like, they were good at doing it because they've been maybe doing it for a while. They had some prior skills or whatever it might be, but I wasn't. So I needed to become good. And to become good, you got to put in the reps. And the only way to put in the reps
mm.
is to wake up every day and do that thing you want to become better at. Did Kobe Bryant become one of the best basketball players of all time by practicing 4 days a month? Same thing with Tiger Woods. Any sports athlete you look at, like, they became great because they put in the reps for a
Mm,
long, long time. So to me, daily was the only way I was going to succeed. Number one, because I had to get good. Number two, because I had to find a niche in the marketplace that was a void that was being ignored or not touched. And I had to find something that was really, really hard to replicate. Like, that's what people don't understand. Everybody's launching businesses that are really easy to replicate. So even if you have a good idea and you're quote unquote first to market, which is important on some levels, if you're successful, it's going to be a wave of people that are flooding in if it's not hard. You got to build
mm,
a high barrier. I always say the higher the barrier, the lower the competition. The problem is people are like, oh man, that'd be too hard to do. I shouldn't do that. Well, it's because you think it's too hard to do. You need to do it. Like, when my mentor and my mastermind leader both told me daily podcasts will be too hard to pull off, I said, man, if the best people in the industry are telling me it can't be done and I find a way to do it, that's the opportunity,
mhm.
because I will own that space, just like Amazon committed back in the day to owning the space of being the everything store. Like, that was going to be their name, by the way, before Amazon was the everything store.
I did not know that.
Yeah, that was going to be their name. But then they wanted to have a little more branding to it, so they came up with the great brand of Amazon, of course. But it was going to be the everything store, and like, they knew it would be so hard to do, but that's why, like, you can't replicate that, and they have
Mm,
such an advantage now. So that's why I think when people are thinking about their podcast or their business or their next venture, it needs to be hard.
mm. It needs to be hard because not everyone can do it, right? So, was there a time in the journey, or was there a moment where you thought, oh my goodness, I've actually made it, or this is a successful show, or I feel like, I am that podcaster that you were talking about, that really good interview? Or was there a moment where you're like, I've done it?
So there's never been an I've made it moment, because I really do believe that you've never made it. Like, that's like the game is over. Like, if you are, at your own funeral because somebody's giving a eulogy about you, they can then say that person made it. Like, they made it,
Mm-hmm,
they did
mm-hmm.
this, they were successful. I did have like an I'm making it moment. Like, making it meaning I am crushing it. I'm doing great. I'm on a fantastic path. And that was about 13 months in. We had our first 6-figure month, low 6 figures. But I was like, wow, I am literally just doing a podcast. And in 1 month, I'm making 6 figures of revenue. This is proving to me that I'm making it. I don't know how long this is going to last, but man, I'm making it. And I'll tell you, that was 129 months ago. And we haven't had a month under 6 figures since then.
Love it so much. So, how much has podcasting changed between 2012 to we're recording this in 2024? What's changed for you in that time, or
Well,
the
what's
things
changed
that
in
you've noticed?
podcasting specifically
Yeah.
is it's completely jumped the shark. And like, I don't even know if I'm using that phrase correctly. I know it's an old Happy Days reference of when Fonzie literally jumped a shark when he was water skiing, and they were like, "All right, the show's over. Like, this is just too ridiculous." So that's kind of where that phrase came from, which is pretty funny. But, for me, it went from nobody really knowing about podcasting, thinking it was a very fringe, weird, techie way of listening to stuff, to now, and I mean literally, everybody has a podcast that wants their voice out there in the world. Not everybody has a podcast, but everybody that wants their voice out in the world has a podcast, from comedians to actors to, philanthropists to whoever it might be. If you want your voice out in the world, you have a podcast. I mean, now you're watching any TV show, any movie, reading any book. It's all podcast this, podcast that. Like, it's just now literally it's assumed if you
Mm.
have any clout in this world whatsoever, you have a podcast, which I can so clearly remember, like in 2014, 15, 16, like if Kate and I heard the word podcast mentioned on any kind of like traditional media, like we flipped out. And usually it was people making fun of it, but like it was still like crazy that they would even make fun of it. Like I can't even believe they would make fun of podcasting. That's nuts. So it's just become now something that everybody's doing. The barrier is so low to do a podcast. It is what it is. Everybody's doing it.
Do you think that's a good thing that the barrier to entry is so low?
It's a good thing and it's a bad thing. It's a good thing if you
Mhm.
understand that, hey, the barrier to start a podcast is low, but the barrier to creating an amazing podcast that gets any kind of success or traction is unbelievably high and much more
Mm.
difficult than it used to be because of the saturation in the market. So now I tell people, hey, they always come to me, John, why is my podcast struggling? I say, because you have the same people on, other people have on their show. You ask them the same questions, they give you the same answers, and your show's the exact same as everybody else's. And that's never going to win. If you are a podcaster, and again, this goes for literally every entrepreneur as well, starting a business. If you can't look in the mirror and say, I am solving this problem better than anybody else, you are going to lose, because your podcast, your business idea, your product, your service, whatever it might be, it must be the number one solution to a real problem in this world. If it's not, you will lose. If it is,
Mm.
you have a chance of winning, because people will beat a path to the doorstep of the number one solution to a real problem they have. They won't listen to the second best podcast interviewing entrepreneurs because it's been done.
Mm, mm. So, what is one of the best strategies that you've specifically used in your podcast that has moved the needle? And not the daily, because obviously we've already covered that. What is some of the, I guess, that one thing that is the thing that's moved the needle the
I've
most?
committed to continuing to keep my finger on the pulse of my listeners and really saying, you know what, I'm going to continue to engage them and ask them what they like, what they don't like, how they're finding the show, what are they struggling with right now. Like those four questions are always coming out of my mouth when I'm interacting on email or social media with my listeners, because that's how you keep your finger on the pulse and you keep your show new and fresh. And that's why, frankly, when I hit episode 2000, which was years and years ago, I've been hearing from my audience like, John, like, show's great, but you've been asking the same six questions for 8 years now, which I had. And that was my
Mm.
niche. And it worked for 8 years. But I started to kind of get the energy and the vibe from my listeners that, maybe it's time to spice things up a little bit. So I did. And now for the last 2000 episodes, we've, created a different show as a result. It's got a lot of similarities, but has a lot of differences as well. And so that finger on the pulse of your avatar, the perfect consumer of your content, whether that be a product, a service, a podcast, fill in the blank, that's the key.
Love it so much. So definitely go listen to Entrepreneurs on Fire. Daily episodes have been around for over 2,500 episodes I've got. But it's even more than that, isn't it?
4,364.
Wowzers. Congratulations. That's so fantastic. Thanks for being on our show at 680 episodes. It's been a
That's
pleasure to have.
impressive. That puts you in the top
Thank you.
1%. You should be proud of that.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. It's been great to have you on the show.
Awesome. Adios.